Okay, next we're going to be hearing from one of Stop the War's national officers, a young anti-imperialist activist who's played a leading role in organising a number of demonstrations. You might have seen him on the London demonstrations with the microphone getting people chanting. Really pleased to welcome you, Shabbir Lakha.
Thanks, Shelley, and thanks to Tariq and Claudia for what they've said. I thought that was a brilliant analysis, and it's great to see so many people still here. Obviously, over the last few weeks, we've seen the most horrific violence against the Palestinian people. We saw the bombs raining down on Gaza. We've seen the evictions of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah and the ongoing ethnic cleansing. And the literal lynch mobs against Palestinians in Israel and the ongoing revenge campaign by the Israeli military against Palestinians living in Israel, which has resulted in over 1,500 Palestinian citizens of Israel being arrested. And when I visited Palestine a couple of years ago, I saw with my own eyes what the Palestinians face, and I saw the violence that they face from settlers having their houses occupied, to the day-to-day brutality of the occupation. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of Western foreign policy in creating the conditions for what is happening to the Palestinian people. And I was going to start with that quote of Joe Biden that Claudia mentioned, that were there not an Israel, the US would have to invent an Israel to protect our interests. It's the best $3 billion investment the US has ever made. And I think this is one of the examples of things which Joe Biden should have said with his inside voice. But it characterizes the relationship between the US and Israel. It is a relationship based on imperialism. Israel is the US's outpost in the Middle East. And that's why the US gives Israel $3.8 billion in military aid every year. That's why the US covers for Israel at the United Nations, why Biden vetoed a ceasefire 3 times while Gaza was being bombed in the last couple of weeks. And we can see how this relationship plays out in terms of protecting US interests in the Middle East. When the senior military official Qasem Soleimani was assassinated last year in January, Netanyahu was informed about the strike before it happened when Congress wasn't. And for those few days where it looked like there was a potential of an escalation in the war with Iran, the US immediately mobilized its military resources in Israel. And we've also seen Israel participate in carrying out airstrikes in Syria, in Iraq, and Lebanon at the behest of the US, taking out so-called targets for them. And the very creation of Israel was for this purpose. Britain's Lord Balfour, who in 1905 passed the Aliens Act to stop Jewish refugees coming here, made the infamous declaration to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And Britain's military governor, Ronald Storrs, explained why. It was to create a Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. The creation of the state of Israel was always a colonialist endeavor because of its geostrategic location, and as Storrs said, in order to stop Arab resistance. And it's for this reason that the US allows Israel to ethnically cleanse, to bomb, to maim and kill Palestinians, because their struggle has from the start been an anti-imperialist struggle. And their struggle has always been of central importance to the wider struggle of the Arab people in the Middle East. That's why when you look at pictures of Tahrir Square in Egypt or the Pearl Roundabout in Bahrain in 2011, you'll see Palestinian flags. And what we've seen in the last few years with the decline of the US empire after its defeats in the wars in the Middle East and its attempt to grapple with maintaining its hegemony in the Middle East. We've seen the defeats in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, has all made Israel's role as a defender of the US interests all the more important. And, we were all glad to see the back of Donald Trump, but we shouldn't at the same time pretend that Biden isn't a continuation of that US imperialist foreign policy. Within a month of him becoming president, he authorized airstrikes on Syria. He authorized a $750 billion defense budget. While we've seen the end of US boots on the ground in Afghanistan and the formal withdrawal of Saudi's war in Yemen, although of course the US continues to back Saudi Arabia in its war in Yemen, These are positive developments, but they are part of a reorientation of US priorities, of more covert and economic and proxy methods of warfare to maintain its grip. And also a redirection of resources towards the new front of war in China, knowing that their loyal ally Israel is there to defend its interests in the Middle East. And I think this relationship, the US's foreign policy, and by extension, Britain's as its junior partner in this, is important to understand when we talk about the struggle for Palestinian freedom, because for one, it makes clear, as I said, that the Palestinian struggle is not only an anti-apartheid and an anti-racist struggle, it is an anti-imperialist one. And it also makes clear that Israel would not be able to do what it does without the full support of the US and Britain. And I think both these things in turn make it clear for us just how important our solidarity movement is, and how important it is that the wider anti-war movement is central to the Palestine solidarity movement. In Britain, we have shown just how strong this movement is, from the 2003 demonstration against the Iraq war, where the slogans were "No war in Iraq, freedom for Palestine," through to the demonstration 10 days ago with 200,000 people marching through the streets of London in unity, all of which have had a fundamental role in shaping public opinion and in holding our government to account. And this movement is why the governments and the media, both in the US and here, continue to do so much to destabilize and delegitimize us. From the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, the prevent agenda, attempts to criminalize BDS, which in the United States they've successfully passed in a number of states. And as we've seen in the last 2 weeks, and with Gavin Williamson's letter to a number of schools, the attempt to stop school students from speaking out in any way in support of Palestine. But that's exactly why we need to keep fighting, and we need to keep our movement united and keep growing, and we need to keep occupying the streets. And we're going to be demonstrating on the 12th of June outside Downing Street when Biden is here, when the G7 summit is happening. And what we're seeing in Palestine is a new phase in the struggle. In the face of extreme violence, they are resisting, and it's our duty to stand with them. So solidarity, and thank you.